Good afternoon. My name is Colin. I contribute to a few different OWASP projects, not in a huge big way to a single project like Dennis who was just speaking, but I contributed to a few people mentioned OWASP AppSensor project. I'm actually currently working on trying to draft out a lot of text for the second version of the book, so I'm not speaking about that today, but if anyone's interested, come and have a chat with me afterwards. I used to work on OpenSAM, Software Assurance Maturity Model as well, and the cheat sheet series were mentioned as well, but perhaps not in enough detail. It's usually worth having a look at all the cheat sheets. I did produce...
Story here a little bit.
Okay. I did produce one of the cheat sheets, but a very boring one called Application Logging. I just wanted to write it all down sometime. If you're thinking about writing a spec for an application, please do think about the logging as you go. So I try to pull together lots of stuff about security logging for applications and document it in the application logging cheat sheet. Today I'm talking about a different project. It didn't start as a project, it just started as a document. I'm going to sort of talk through how this came up. I don't know, I know there's a lot of developers here, and a lot of people work in different ways, but you know, agile methodologies are very popular. And I know there is sometimes it's a bit of a hurdle to try to build security into agile development at times, and some people think it's not possible. But last year, in July, there's an organisation called SafeCode, which is like an industry body, sort of American large software development companies like Adobe are members. And they produce a few different guidance documents. And last year they produced this thing called Practical Security Stories and Security Tasks for Agile Development Environments. This isn't very readable, but the idea is that there's about 50 or 60 examples of security stories. So this one, for example, says, number 18, as an architect stroke developer, I want to ensure, and as QA, I want to verify that cross-site request forgery attacks are prevented. And then it's got a list of, for example, backlog tasks. You don't need to read this. And then it's got some cross-referencing to one of their other documents called the SafeCode Fundamental Practices, so Fundamental Practices for Secure Software Development. And then there's some cross-references to the common weakness enumeration. So for cross-site scripting, that's number 352. There's a whole raft of sort of interesting security stories that could be pulled into agile development practices. To be honest, they're probably a little bit very specific. I'm not sure you're going to have a security story for each one of these, but they're a good starting point and something to perhaps aid discussion. So I thought that was really useful. The other document that we, I think both Tobias and Rory mentioned, was this thing called the Secure Coding Practices Reference Guide, which isn't actually really coding practices, it's actually a list of security requirements, okay? And here's an example, just some of the checkbox items against authentication and password management, for example. I think Tobias said, you know, there's like 12 or 17 sections, something like this, and there's a few hundred of these sort of requirements, and they're really quite good just to run your eyeball down and double check whether they are useful in whatever it is you're developing or reviewing or testing and so on. So we've got things like all authentication controls should fail securely, all administrative and account management functions must be at least as secure as a primary authentication mechanism, and so on and so on. Generally, most of the things in here are not going to be things you're going to say, oh no, we don't need to do that. You obviously have a look through and see what you're going to prioritise, but they're all generally very practical sorts of security requirements. Everything on all the slides, I've got the references at the bottom here. I guess we'll be publishing the slides on the OWASP London, from the OWASP London website page as well. But I still didn't think these two documents were good enough to make it easy enough for sometimes people to pull things together. Has anyone heard of the Microsoft Elevation of Privilege card game? Okay, half of those people, great. Okay, this is really good. I vote for Microsoft. No, this is free and open source. Okay, it is open source. It's a game where they aimed at helping you do threat modeling. Okay, because threat modeling sort of means identify security requirements as well. And it's based around the threats for their terminology of spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. All the files can be downloaded. So there's a PDF of the game cards, instructions, scorecards, and a white paper. And it's even got the system requirements here, but it does work on Windows, okay? But actually just the printer will do. But I was a bit concerned that the problem with the elevation of privilege card game, is I've always had trouble using it with any sort of development teams, is that, particularly for web application development, is that the EOP stuff is sort of built for Microsoft writing SQL Server 2020 or whatever it is, and Microsoft Office 2015 or whatever's coming along. And so some of the examples are not the sort of things that most web development teams are going to come across. Okay, so an attacker could squat on the random port or socket that serves not normal users, or an attacker can confuse a client because there are too many ways to identify a server, etc., etc. So I wanted to try to come up with something similar, but didn't have all these things that were much less relevant to web application development, because that's what I was trying to focus on at the time. So I've created this thing called Cornucopia, okay, and what we're talking about is the first edition of it, which is just for e-commerce websites. Okay, so the deck of cards is a bit like Microsoft Escalation or Privilege card game, very similar rules, but I've tried to make it more web-centric. Okay, so basically what I used was all the requirements in that Secure Coding Practices guideline and converted it into a set of playing cards. So we can see the sorts of things are a little bit different here. So Gary can take over a user session because there is a long or no inactivity timeout, or a long or no overall session timeout. And actually, these things are all mapped specifically to statements in that Secure Coding Practices reference card. Everything that's in there is somewhere on one of these cards. Okay. As you can see, some of them have to be sort of combined together because we've only got 60 or 70 cards and there's 200 odd requirements. So, as I mentioned before, elevation of privilege use stride as the different suits, so spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service. What I chose to do was to group them instead into sort of security principles for web development, so data validation and coding, authentication, session management, authorization, cryptography, and a sort of bundle for everything else. Things about data loss, software dependencies, abuse of trust, non-repudiation, configuration management, some of those other sort of security misconfiguration type things often. So you see there's a slightly different bias here. So in the Microsoft game, there's 13 cards on each of these things, and 13 cards on tampering. It's a bit over the top really for web development. So we don't have the names are quite short. So at the moment we just use color coding for the things. Okay. So the elevation of privilege playing cards look great. Okay, really good. The Cornucopia ones don't. Okay, but you can print them out on your printer really easily. Okay, so really this is just like, this was done as version 0.1 or something at the end of last August or something. So okay, so we've got the suit name here, okay, the number, the jack, okay. Here's the attack text, okay. But I also wanted to put more cross-references and do it on the cards themselves, okay. So the Microsoft stuff hasn't got any of that. And they've also got really boring backs, whereas we've got OWASP tart and all of that. Okay? It's much better. So, okay, little X means Microsoft better, all right? but we might because of the banks. Also, there was one or two things in the Microsoft thing which are vendor specific. So it actually mentions .NET on one of the cards, which of course is evil. And then they've got this thing about access control this, and even all live ID holders and things. Of course, no one has a live ID nowadays, do they? Just want to make that the Cornucopia ones are just much more general, and there's like in the elevation of privilege thing, an ACE card was sort of like, you've invented a new tampering attack. So the ACEs here are like, you've invented a new attack of a particular sort, or the Cornucopia one is of any type. And then I've put some blurby OWASP advertising text on the card as well, where we don't have a particular description. So they're more web specific. Information rich, okay, so elevation of privilege, suit name, attack description and ranking. So we've got all of those, but it's the cross-referencing which is the most important part here, okay? So the first line is the secure coding practices, so the numbers 10, 32, 93 and so on reference specific text in the Boeing document, the secure coding practices document. I've also done a cross-reference to the application security verification standard, which is this thing, you can really see it. If you're looking at generally what should you be verifying for different sorts of applications, this is quite a good cross-reference. And this is quite handy because it's grouped in a similar way to the reviews and suits here. OWASP App Sensor, which we've mentioned a couple of times, some of the detection points for malicious use make sense, so we'll put cross-references. So this one, ACE3, is an access control exception. Then I've also tried to cross-reference against the KPAC, which is the Common Attack Pattern Enumeration and Configuration, I think. So there's a number of example things of this is how attacks are sort of the thesaurus of attacks, and that's funded by the US Department of Homeland Security, I think. So I've tried to cross-reference those. And then at the bottom here, the safe code document, okay? So each card is then cross-referenced to those agile user stories for secure development. So on any card, you can look at all these things to get more information if you want. Okay. So the other problem I didn't really like about the elevation of privilege thing was they were a bit impersonal. Okay, so we had an attacker could do this, and an attacker could do that, an attacker could do the other and things. Okay, so I wanted to make them more personal. So I thought it was much better if you actually had people's names in here. So every attacker has a name, okay? And a name is not necessarily a person, it could be a system name, it could be some other application, yes, it could be an external attacker, it could be a member of staff, it could be your boss, okay? Anything like that. So everyone's got a name. So they're all being personalised, okay? And I didn't just choose the names randomly. We do actually have two jokers in the pack, so they're just Bob and Alice, okay? But all the other ones, I had a look at the OWASP board members and members of staff, so I choose all their first names, use them, and then there's a few hundred people, several hundred people who actually volunteer to pay the individual membership. So I randomly selected names from that list as well, so that they're included in there. And I dropped any double-barrel first names just so you could really spot who they are. So I think Justin's in there, for example, somewhere. Or there is a Justin.
There's several Justins.
There are. Okay, you're probably on. So we get things like Jim can undertake malicious non-normal action without real-time detection and response, which of course is App Sensor. Okay, so you can. There are names, certainly your members and things who are not on the list. So we've got suit and value, the attack description, and the cross-referencing. Okay. So the purpose is that when you get a card, it's your time to play. What you've got to do is to understand this and determine whether it is a viable attack against whatever it is you're analysing at the time. So you might have a module, a piece of code. You might be early in your processes, and you might just have some data flow diagrams or some architectural arrangements or something. Okay, you do this more than once through the process. what you want to do is read the text and say, is it possible that that could occur in this situation that we have here? Okay? And if it is a viable attack, document it briefly, and then subsequently, perhaps look at some of those cross-references to work out what other things you're going to need to do to either prove that it is an attack you need to worry about, whether there's anything else that mitigates it, perhaps outside the scope of what you were assessing, and then possibly start writing things like user stories and unit tests and so on to make sure you can avoid it. Okay, so if I just look at an example very quickly. Fabio mentioned payment card industry data security standard. They brought out a document start of this year which talks about e-commerce implementations, and they categorized building your e-commerce payment forms in these different ways. And there's a couple of them here which are very common, of course, an inline frame where you embed your payment provider's form in the background, or you might also just redirect completely to a payment provider's hosted payment page. Quite popular ways of doing it. But what's quite interesting is that the guidance mainly talks about what does the merchant need to consider when they're using these methods, for example, what the merchant does and also what the payment service provider does. And in terms of the merchant, they do have to be careful about the code around the inline frame or the code that's doing the redirect to the hosted payment page, because the PCI Security Standards Council has identified that those are sort of risky areas. Even though you've sort of outsourced the payment bit, you have to be also be careful that someone doesn't manipulate things before the customer gets redirected or they get to the payment form. But they don't actually talk very much about the hosted payment page or the embedded iframe terribly much. So if we just think about that for a moment, and we pull out a couple of cards. So this one is Michael can bypass the application to gain access to data because administrative tools or administrative interfaces are not secured adequately. So if we're thinking about these hosted payment pages that are somewhere else on this secure gateway, or allegedly secure gateway, how might this sort of card actually have some meaning there? Well, one thing that might happen is that the payment service provider might allow the merchant to customize that page, make it look beige to match into the website, add your logo on it, perhaps add a bit more text, alter how some of the interaction occurs with the user. That actually means that they will normally provide some sort of administrative interface for them to upload or change the template in some way. And those templates can often include things like other content, but who's looking after the credentials for for that administrative interface? If the merchant's got them, how are they looking after them? So actually there is some obligation there on the merchant to protect those credentials, because if I can change their template on the payment service provider, I can probably redirect or alter what that page is doing, even though it's hosted by some other party. And then this one, data validation. Jeff can inject data into a client or device interpreter because a parameterized interface is not being used or is not being implemented correctly, or the data is not being encoded. You can see how these things are strung together a bit. Or there is no restrictive policy on code or data includes. So in the example of our hosted payment page somewhere else where we can perhaps upload the template to, it's sort of interesting because on some of these payment service provider templates you can actually put JavaScript and CSS and images. And they might be things that are actually sourced from a less trusted location, such as people might put in metrics, or they might include some JavaScript library from some other site. But interestingly, most commonly, of course, they'll include content from their own website, like the logo, or a style sheet, or the JavaScript. Okay, so actually, these things have also got some degree of control over the hosted payment page. So you can see how playing around with the cards might help you enumerate some sorts of additional ideas about the applications. So how does it work? Okay, well, at the moment there's a Word document, which has got some stuff. You can download this, print it out. Okay, so there's guidance, And in here, there are sheets, okay, with the cards on. And they've been laid out so that they will fit onto, you can use some of these pre-scored sort of card things, you know, like business cards, so it works on a couple of them. Those sheets are like sort of lightly pre-scored, so you can then print the cards onto them, yeah. Remember to do the back as well. Then you punch them all out, and you end up with a deck of cards, okay, so like this. That, you can look at them afterwards. I think the grey and stuff are maybe a bit darker now. Some of the colours don't show up so well, but you end up with a pack of cards. You don't need to buy the expensive pre-scored stuff. There's also one of the pages which has got some guidelines just for trim lines. It's not done with bleeds and proper trims and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so it's just like do it 1 week sort of job thing really. What do we do? Well, you select a pack of cards, you dish them out to your player, so you pretend this is what's going on here. We've got 4 people playing. It doesn't just need to be developers, you should involve the testers, business owners, people responsible for operations. Lots of people have lots of different ideas. Okay. So all the players should have the same cards each, and then randomly select someone to start. I think for some reason in the Microsoft game you have to start with the 3 of 10 group. I'm not sure why. Okay. So, but the most important thing, of course, is you get a point for winning a hand, a round, okay? But you also get a point for identifying whether this is a valid attack of some sort, and therefore a security requirement. So actually, documenting the security requirements there on the left is actually the most important thing, although most people want to win the game, okay? So you want to get prizes as well. So that might be chocolate, cakes, flowers, beer, whatever, pizzas, whatever suits your company, okay? At great expense, I tried to work on here. Okay. So imagine that the players have just played this. So Ferdinand started. He started with the king here. If you've got the suit, you're meant to follow it. So all these people had blue cards, with pale blue. So tend to. Okay. So Ferdinand won this round. Okay. So he gets a point for. Let's say he got a requirement documented here. He also won the round. Martin got the requirement. Imogen didn't identify a requirement, and Eric did, so you get it like that. So we can gradually progress through the game as the different people play. Okay, so Ferdinand starts again. Jack, he's got to play. Martin's got to play the same suit, so he plays an ace, so it looks like he's going to win. Imogen's got one of the greys as well, and Eric. So this time Martin's won the round, so he'll play next time. Okay, so
how he wins?
Sorry?
How he wins
the game?
Yeah.
Okay, overall you want to get the total number of points. So at the moment, Ferdinand's winning. He's got 3 points. Okay, 2, 1, and 1 at the moment. Oh, the highest card wins. Okay, and the blue one's a cornucopia, which you can treat as a trump suit, okay? And then there's jokers if you include them as well. So the winning the round is purely by the score on the card, but you also get the point for identifying a requirement as well. So I think Martin started with a 9 here, which is trumps. Imogen puts the queen in, Eric 7. Now Ferdinand doesn't have one of these, so he's just going to throw away a lowest value card he's got. So this one wins. Okay, so it's just like a, I don't know, sevens or trumps or whatever you want to call it. So we'll just skip through that, and we won't. I won't bore you with continuing all the way through, and then on to the last round. But this is I'll put the. This is an open office document, so you can play the presentation yourself if you want to learn it. Learn the rules. As I said, the most important thing is actually that schedule of requirements that you're actually building up on the left-hand side. Okay, but you don't need to use all the cards at once, because obviously there's actually quite a lot of cards, and you can't keep them going for too long a time. So we have all those suits. And a full deck is, I think it's 60 cards. And it would actually take me too long to go through it, even on quite a small scope. So what you could do is split the deck up, perhaps over a number of sessions, or you could create application-specific decks. So you might know, for example, that on an extra deck you'll need to worry about half the pack or something, okay? Because maybe you know the way that the thing is configured or deployed, that you don't need to worry about some of the other types of attacks. You can end up with a smaller list of things to begin with. Whereas if you just say add a public information website, it is available externally, but you may not have a lot of functionality, you may not have authentication, you may not have no session management. So there's a whole raft of things you might be able to knock out the pack that you don't have to need to bother with. So just narrow down, and that'd be much quicker to actually work through. And you can, of course, create development-specific ones as well. So rather than application-specific, you can say, well, actually we're using ASP.NET version 4.5, and because of our coding standards, we do this, this, and this. Therefore, we're not going to have to deal with all these cards. We've already reduced the number of potential attack issues that we have to deal with. Or you might go the other way, just look at your own coding standards, or of course, you might say, well, what's the deck of cards that we need to meet a particular compliance requirement, and just focus in on those, for example. It's best to play in a group of people, 4 or 6 probably is quite a good number, a mixture of backgrounds. You can play on your own, it's not ideal. You will probably win, but you probably won't identify as many requirements as you would if you were discussing it amongst other people. So, of course, the really exciting thing is, does it match this card game? And clearly it's just a card game. But in January of this year, remember I mentioned this document which has got some stuff about e-commerce. This came out in January. It's an information supplement from the PCI Security Standards Council for payment card industry data security standards relating to e-commerce guidelines. And rather strangely in there are some references to OWASP, and guess what turned up? This document. And all I had done was produce something called version 0.4 and stuck it in a file on the OWASP wiki and posted one message to one mailing list, which no one responded to. Okay? Reference, okay, which I thought was very good. Okay?
Yeah.
So I thought, great, okay, tomorrow I will produce version 1. So, yeah, it's sort of referenced. That's what I said. Sort of referenced by PCIDSS. Okay. But you do have to think. Just did someone go and Google site OWASP.org e-commerce and find it? I suspect so. So anyway, that's nice. Okay, so it is mentioned. So you're all going to do it, obviously. What am I planning to do? I want to try and identify framework-specific card decks. There is a project called, an OWASP project called something like the, is it Secure Frameworks project? I think what it's attempted to do is to document if you're using Spring.ASP, different versions, and say, well, which security controls are possibly supported by it. So I'd like to come up and say, well, okay, well, if you're using these and you're packaging it properly, which cards might you be able to survive without it? Okay. I'd also like to possibly do some design on the cards. There's not much space really, but that would probably need a bit of funding from someone or other. But it would benefit much more greatly if some other people could actually have a game with the cards and just see how usable it is. Perhaps focus on whether the cross-referencing is good or not. One thing is the Secure Coding Practices guide, that Boeing document, didn't actually have any IDs on it. So what I did by cross-references, I just went through a version of it, put 1 to 212 or whatever it is on them. And last week I put up an XML file which has got the cross-referencing, those IDs on it. what I'd like to do is to pull in the other cross-references we've got on here, and also map perhaps to other things, other OWASP projects, particular things like the developer guide, or at least the testing guide, because the testing guide has got some IDs on it against all the different tests, so that was quite good. And I think we could map all the testing guide items to each of the cards here as well, which basically means it's then also mapped to the security coding requirements. The printing thing sort of worked. It's fairly quick. The cards are slightly a bit crude at the moment because they're just punch out, but they are sort of usable. As I say, there's probably too many. If you want to start with something, you want to do a smaller number. We have been through and we mentioned App Sensor a couple of times this morning, and also I showed you the cross-references. The cards actually reference what we call the detection points in App Sensor. Dennis alluded to App Sensor as well. He sort of mentioned that there was Java code. The App Sensor project is mainly actually a document type of output rather than a code type of output. There is an example or two example Java implementations. They don't implement everything, so that's what Dennis was using in his demonstration previously. But largely the project is more of a sort of concept, and it talks about how you might think about doing this in your own code. It gives you lots of ideas for detecting attackers, and also what the responses might be to them, what things you might sort of do, monitoring, alerting, logging out, locking out, proxying, all that type of thing. So the cross-referencing to that is the detection points is already done, and I don't think we need to do the response actions, but again, it'd be worth going through and doing some cross-checking, because at the moment it's maybe just me that's gone through and done it, so it's not necessarily correct. I wrote the thing called the Ecommerce Website Edition. It's certainly possible we could put decks together for completely different sorts of applications. Actually, possibly out of some of those, actually the mobile application one might be the next best bet, because there's a very good project which a couple of people mentioned here that looked at was the mobile security project. And in that, there's a lot of guidance on the sorts of controls and issues with mobile application development. So I think we could create very quickly a fairly similar card deck, but just do it for mobile apps. And then we could use something for web services or smart meters or something else, whatever. To that. So the project wiki has been updated recently, so there's quite a lot more information on there. There's a link here in the top right just to download this Word document. It's currently version 1.00, but there's minor updates coming on very shortly, 1.01, which has got a few text changes, nothing substantial, but I may try and get the framework-specific decks in there. If not, I'll save that for another minor update. So the project is available on that website address. There is an email list, but just download the file straight away and have a play. So we're a little bit early on this, but you didn't have to watch the whole card game. I'll leave the cards up here for a bit later. You can have a read through them. I think it's almost a full deck. But if anyone's got any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer. Yes.
Hi. Well, when do you perceive this game to be played? At release planning, or the beginning of an iteration, or something like that? Or?
Early in an iteration. You could also use it with when writing security requirements, wherever that falls into the development life cycle, provided the people who are taking part have got perhaps enough knowledge to understand some of the words, because some of the words are a bit something a bit security orientated. But perhaps if you've got someone there to facilitate that discussion, they can say, oh well, this means such and such, and then let the other people who are perhaps thinking more about business requirements sort of ponder on it a bit. So earlier is better, yes, because you sort of want to get the requirements and the unit tests and things out the back of this.
So what are you know, I'm going to go grab these and print off a copy for myself. What are the pre-punched ones which work for you? What's the model that you have there?
Well, the code.
No, the specific model brand of the thing you printed on, punch it out. Yes. Avery.
Oh, it's written in the document. Down in the document, there's two. The numbers are in there.
Okay.
These aren't that cheap. Okay, so this is C3213. So I think it's C3217s or something also work. These ones are curved edges, and the other ones were straight edges. If you can do it onto these, at least the card's fairly thick, so it gets through your printer twice, which is okay. It's fairly quick to print out. Snap them out is sort of okay, but get someone else to do it if you can. So the nice thing would be to, if someone printed out a deck of cards, use them for a while, and then send them back with scribblings on them. That's fine, I can deal with that, because then I can incorporate comments. There are one or two which are they're a bit long-winded because I've used all the security requirements. I've had to do and or sort of thing all the way through, and it possibly makes them feel a bit awkward. And I don't know whether to drop some of the requirements or just so you can shorten them. People could do what they want. You can create your own deck because you can just edit the document. So if you just want to change all the words, you can. Okay, so you might do something very specific in your own environment or your own sort of whatever languages and frameworks you're using. But some of these things may just not be relevant, and you could just create your own pack from them. Any other questions?
With the security stories that you spoke about at the top of the session, was there an inclusion for the acceptance criteria as well?
No, it's just got the backlog tasks. I think you could probably. In fact, if you submit some ideas to them, I'm sure they'd add them. I think if you submit the ideas to SafeCode, I'm sure they would add them. It's not it was quite a useful document. I think it's just a bit, and a lot of people won't be aware of it, which is sort of the other thing that I just wanted to try to highlight. I mean, it's not nothing to do with OWASP, but it's just a useful document. I think reading this and also the Microsoft STL for Agile, I think if you read those two together, you could probably come up with a happy balance, something that works for the way your team is. Okay, thank you.